Can we share your fries, sir? 6 words. That was all it took to change 2 lives forever. Clara Bennett stood at the edge of a stranger's table in a small lakeside cafe in Seattle, her 5-year-old son's hand wrapped tightly in hers. Rain dripped from the hem of her worn coat onto the wooden floor. Her cheeks burned with a shame she had never known before. She was 32 years old. She had survived losing her husband. She had survived losing her home. She had survived 3 years of doing everything alone, of working 2 jobs, of counting pennies in the dark while her son slept. But nothing had prepared her for this moment, standing in front of a stranger, asking for food, because she couldn't afford to feed her child. The man across from her looked up from his documents, dark hair, slightly disheveled, a charcoal coat that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent, eyes the color of storm clouds, eyes that looked like they hadn't smiled in a very long time. He stared at her as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. Clara wanted to disappear. She wanted to grab Noah and run out into the rain and never look back. She could feel the eyes of other customers on her back. She could hear the whispers starting. But her son was hungry. His small stomach had been growling for the past hour, and she had pretended not to hear. She had bought him a warm milk with the last of her coins, but milk wasn't enough. He needed food, real food, and hunger, she had learned, was always louder than pride. "I'll pay for them," she added quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't have enough for food today." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The man said nothing. 1 second passed. 2, 3. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She could feel Noah looking up at her, his small face confused, trusting, waiting to see what would happen next. Then slowly, the stranger slid the plate of golden fries toward the center of the table. "They're better when shared anyway." 4 words, spoken quietly, without pity, without judgment, just a simple truth offered like a gift. Something in Clara's chest cracked open. She exhaled a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Noah's face lit up like Christmas morning. He reached for a fry carefully, reverently, as if it were made of gold. "Thank you, sir," Noah whispered. "You're really kind." The man looked at the boy for a long moment. Something flickered behind those storm-gray eyes. A memory, a ghost, a wound that had never quite healed. Then, for the first time in what seemed like years, his lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're welcome," he said softly. "Enjoy them." Behind the counter, 2 young baristas leaned toward each other. "Oh my God," one of them whispered. "Do you know who that is?" "Who?" "That's Nathan Cole. The Nathan Cole. The tech billionaire. He was on the cover of Forbes last month. He's worth like $4 billion. "You're kidding." "I swear, that's definitely him." But Clara didn't hear any of it. She was too busy watching her son eat, too busy blinking back tears of relief, too grateful for this small mercy from a stranger whose name she would never know. Or so she thought. 3 hours earlier, Clara's morning had started like every other. She woke at 5:15 a.m. in the cramped studio apartment she shared with Noah in a working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Seattle. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a butterfly. Noah called it their indoor pet. The radiator clanked and hissed like an old man with a cold. Clara sat at the small kitchen table under a single flickering light bulb, a glass jar of coins in front of her. She counted slowly, carefully, hopefully. $14.22. That was everything. Every penny she had in the world until her next paycheck in 5 days. Rent was due in 3 days. The landlord had already slipped a warning notice under her door. Noah needed new shoes. His current ones had a hole in the left toe that he tried to hide by walking on the side of his foot, thinking she wouldn't notice. She always noticed. Clara closed her eyes and pressed her palms flat against the table. 3 years. It had been 3 years since David died. She could still remember the phone call, The police officer's voice, careful and rehearsed, the words that didn't make sense. Drunk driver, red light, intersection on Fifth Avenue. I'm sorry, ma'am. David had been 31 years old. He had been coming home from working late, saving up for a family vacation they would never take. Clara had been 29, young enough to rebuild, old enough to know how hard it would be. She had sold the house because she couldn't afford the mortgage alone. She had moved to a cheaper neighborhood. She had taken every job she could find, the library program during the day, the bakery at night, and still every single month felt like swimming against a current that never stopped pushing back. But she had Noah, and Noah had her. That was enough. It had to be enough. From the bedroom doorway, a small voice broke the silence. "Mommy, can we have star pancakes today?" Noah stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His sandy brown hair stuck up in every direction like he had been wrestling with his pillow. His smile was missing 2 teeth in front. Clara's heart clenched. She had no eggs, no milk, no flour, not even butter. But she smiled anyway, because that's what mothers do. "How about we have an adventure instead?" she said, pulling him into her arms. "We'll go to the cafe by the lake after library time. I heard they have the best hot chocolate in Seattle." Noah's eyes went wide. "Really? With marshmallows? Maybe even 2 marshmallows." She would figure out the money later. She always did. Across the city in a glass penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay, Nathan Cole stood at a window that cost more than most people's houses. He was 38 years old. He had built a tech empire from nothing, from a cramped apartment in a borrowed laptop and a dream that refused to die. Forbes had called him Seattle's most eligible billionaire 3 years running. He had everything a man could want, and he had never felt more alone. On his desk sat a framed photograph. A woman with auburn hair and laughing eyes holding a newborn baby wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. Sarah, his wife, Emma, their daughter. They were supposed to grow old together. They were supposed to watch Emma take her first steps, say her first words, ride her first bicycle. They were supposed to have Sunday pancakes and summer vacations, and a lifetime of ordinary moments that add up to something extraordinary. Instead, they had 4 months. A car accident on a rainy night, a truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel, a split second that erased everything. Nathan survived. A broken arm, a few cracked ribs, nothing that wouldn't heal. Sarah and Emma didn't make it to the hospital. That was 4 years ago. Nathan had thrown himself into work after that. 18-hour days, billion-dollar acquisitions, board meetings and conference calls, and strategic expansions that filled every waking moment. He built walls so high that even his own mother couldn't reach him anymore. His phone buzzed. "Mr. Cole, the Henderson acquisition meeting has been moved to 3. Also, the quarterly projections need your review before end of day." Nathan stared at the photograph. Sarah smiled back at him, frozen forever in a moment that would never come again. She would have hated this, he thought. She would have told me to go outside, to breathe, to remember that money means nothing if you have no one to share it with. "Cancel everything," he said. "Sir? I said cancel it. I'm going for a walk." He grabbed his coat and left before anyone could protest. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he needed to move, to breathe, to feel something other than the hollow ache that had become his constant companion. He ended up at a small cafe by the lake, a place he had never been before, chosen for no reason except that the rain had started and the door was closed. He ordered food he didn't want. He settled into a corner table with reports he didn't care about. And then she walked in, a woman with tired eyes and blonde hair that fell in damp waves around her shoulders. A little boy clutching her hand, his small sneakers squeaking against the floor. She looked around the crowded cafe, searching for a seat. There were none, not a single empty chair in the entire place. except half of his table. Nathan watched her hesitate at the counter, watched her count coins from a worn leather wallet, watched her face fall when the total wasn't enough. Then he watched her do something extraordinary. She squared her shoulders. She lifted her chin. She took her son's hand and walked directly toward him. And she asked to share his fries. Not begging, not pleading, just asking, proud and embarrassed and fierce all at once. Something inside Nathan, something that had been frozen solid for 4 years, began to thaw. When the meal ended, Clara reached for her wallet. "Please let me pay for our drinks," she said. "And the fries. I insist." The server shook her head gently. "He already took care of it, ma'am. Everything." Clara turned to the stranger. He was already on his feet, gathering his coat and documents. "Thank you," she said, "but I don't accept charity. I'll pay it forward. That's how I balance kindness." The man paused. He looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, not with pity, not with condescension, but with something that almost looked like respect. "I believe you will," he said quietly. "At least tell me your name," Clara said. "So I can pay it forward properly." He hesitated for just a moment. "Nathan." Just that. No last name. No explanation. Then he turned and walked out into the rain. Clara watched him go, something stirring in her chest that she couldn't name. An awareness, a recognition, a feeling that this moment meant more than she understood. "Mommy," Noah tugged her sleeve. "Why did that man look so sad?" Clara looked down at her son, this small, perceptive boy who noticed everything. "I don't know, baby," she said softly. "Maybe he lost someone he loved." "Like we lost Daddy?" Clara's throat tightened. "Maybe. Something like that." Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up at her with those big, serious eyes. "I hope he finds someone to share his fries with again." Clara kissed the top of his head. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." She didn't know that the sad man in the charcoal coat was thinking about her too. She didn't know that he would look for her every day for the next 2 weeks. And she didn't know that this single moment, this shared plate of fries in a rainy cafe, had just set both their lives on a collision course with something neither of them expected. Something like hope. Something like love. Part 2. The Unraveling. 2 weeks passed. Nathan couldn't stop thinking about her. He returned to the cafe 3 times, ordering fries he didn't eat, watching the door for a woman whose name he still didn't know. It was ridiculous. He was a billionaire. He could have hired an entire team to find her in an hour. But something stopped him. Something about the way she had asked, proud but not begging, embarrassed but not broken, made him want to do this differently. He didn't want to be the rich man who tracked down the poor woman. He didn't want to turn a genuine moment into a transaction. So he waited and wondered and told himself he was being foolish. Then, on a gray October afternoon, fate intervened. He was parked near a bus stop on the outskirts of downtown, finishing a call with his assistant, when movement across the street caught his eye. Clara stood under the narrow overhang of a bus shelter, her arms wrapped tightly around Noah. Rain poured from the sky in heavy sheets, hammering the pavement, turning the streets into rushing rivers. Her coat was soaked through. Her hair was plastered to her face. Water dripped from her chin. But Noah was completely dry. Nathan watched, frozen behind his steering wheel. As Clara reached into her worn backpack and pulled out a plastic grocery bag, the thin, cheap kind from any supermarket, she shook it open, then gently draped it over Noah's head and shoulders like a makeshift raincoat. She tucked the edges carefully under his chin, adjusting it until he was covered. "There," she said, her voice barely audible through the rain and the closed car window. "Now you're waterproof." Noah giggled. "I look silly, Mommy." "You look warm." Clara smiled down at him. And warm beat silly every time. Then she did something that made Nathan's breath catch in his throat. She unwrapped her own scarf, the only warmth she had, and wrapped it around Noah's neck. She was shivering violently now. Her lips were turning blue, but she was laughing, making faces at Noah, tickling him, keeping him distracted from the cold. Nathan's hand moved to the door handle. I should help, he thought. I should give her my coat. I should offer them a ride. But he stopped. Not because he didn't care, not because he was afraid, because he understood something in that moment that most people never learn. Some battles aren't about winning, they're about fighting. And Clara wasn't a woman who needed rescue. She was a warrior. What she needed wasn't a savior. She needed to be seen, not for her struggles, but for her strength. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes. Clara bent down, and Noah climbed onto her back, wrapping his small arms around her neck. She carried him aboard, the plastic bag still draped over his head like a crooked, ridiculous, beautiful halo. Nathan watched until the bus rounded the corner and disappeared from sight. Then he put his head against the steering wheel and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 4 years. For the first time since Sarah and Emma died, Nathan Cole felt something other than emptiness. He felt alive. The next morning, Nathan made a decision. He asked his assistant a simple question. If a woman with extraordinary talent and no money wanted to make a difference in children's lives, where would she spend her time? The assistant raised an eyebrow, but did as asked. 2 hours later, Nathan had an answer. A small community library on the outskirts of Seattle, where a woman matching Clara's description volunteered twice a week running a free children's art program. He went without a plan. The library was warm and worn, the kind of place held together by love and donations and the stubborn belief that stories could change lives. Faded posters lined the walls. Mismatched chairs surrounded small tables. The air smelled of old books and crayon wax. In the back corner, behind rows of donated paperbacks, Clara sat at a child-sized table surrounded by children. A red pencil was in her hand. Her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, revealing smudges of color on her wrists. She was drawing. Nathan positioned himself behind a tall bookshelf, out of sight but close enough to watch. Her sketches were extraordinary. A mother walking through rain with a child under an umbrella made of stars. A boy laughing at shadow puppets dancing on a ceiling. A small, crooked house with golden light pouring from every window into a dark, uncertain night. They weren't just drawings. They were windows into a soul that still believed in beauty despite everything. A little girl with messy braids ran up and threw her arms around Clara's waist. "Miss Clara, I finished my whole book. I read every single page." Clara set down her pencil and knelt so she was eye to eye with the child. "That's amazing, sweetheart. You're becoming a real bookworm. I'm so proud of you." "Your drawings make my bad days better," the girl whispered, suddenly shy. Clara's eyes glistened. She brushed a curl from the girl's face with such tenderness that Nathan had to look away. She has a gift, he thought, a real gift, and she's hiding it in a library basement because no one ever gave her a chance. He didn't approach her that day. It wasn't the right time. But he left knowing two things with absolute certainty. He would see her again, and somehow, some way, he would find a way to help her shine without making her feel like charity. Clara worked 2 jobs, the library during the day, a bakery 4 nights a week. She had been running on empty for months, skipping meals so Noah could eat, sleeping 3 hours a night, taking double shifts whenever they were offered. Her body was failing, but she refused to stop. One evening, 3 weeks after the cafe, Nathan stopped by the bakery. He told himself it was coincidence, that he happened to be in the neighborhood, that he just happened to want pastries at 8 o'clock at night. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. He spotted Clara behind the counter the moment he walked in. She was moving slowly, her face pale, her hands trembling as she arranged croissants in the display case. She looked up. Their eyes met. Something flickered across her face. Recognition. Surprise. But before she could say anything, her manager called her name from the back. Clara turned to grab a tray from the shelf behind her. Then her knees buckled. She collapsed behind the register with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the entire shop. "Someone call 911, the manager shouted. But Nathan was already moving. He vaulted over the counter, dropping to his knees beside her. He pressed his fingers to her neck. Her pulse was racing, thready. Her skin was burning hot. He lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "Don't call an ambulance," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "I'm taking her to my building. I have medical staff on site. It'll be faster." He carried her out into the night before anyone could argue. In the wellness suite on the top floor of Nathan's office building, Clara lay unconscious on a leather sofa. An IV drip fed fluids into her arm. Monitors beeped softly in the background. The on-call physician confirmed what Nathan had suspected. Severe dehydration, exhaustion, a fever of 103 degrees. Her body had simply given out. "She'll be fine," the doctor said, "but she needs rest, real rest, not a few hours here and there." Nathan nodded, but his attention had shifted to the door. It burst open, and a small figure rushed in. Noah. The bakery manager had called the emergency contact on Clara's file. A neighbor who watched Noah during her night shifts. The neighbor had brought him straight over. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. But he didn't cry. He didn't panic. He walked straight to his mother, climbed onto the sofa beside her, and got to work. From Clara's bag, he pulled out a small thermos. He unscrewed the cap and poured honey water into a paper cup, setting it carefully on the side table. Then he went to the sink in the corner, dampened a washcloth, wrung it out with small practiced hands, and returned to lay it gently across his mother's forehead. He pulled the blanket up to her shoulders and smoothed it with both palms. Then he leaned in close to her ear and whispered, "When Mommy sleeps, I protect her, because she always protects me." Nathan turned away. His vision blurred, his throat closed. This wasn't a child playing doctor. This was a 5-year-old boy who had learned far too young what it means to step up when the world steps back. They don't need saving, Nathan realized. They just need someone who won't walk away. When Clara woke hours later, the first thing she saw was Nathan. He was sitting in a chair across from her, still in his suit, watching her with those storm gray eyes. "How long have you been there?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Long enough." She tried to sit up. He moved forward quickly but didn't touch her. "Easy. The doctor said you need to rest." "Doctor?" Clara looked around. At the leather furniture, the medical equipment, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Seattle skyline at night. "Where am I?" "My office building. I have a medical suite for employees. I brought you here after you collapsed at the bakery." Clara's brow furrowed. "Your office building? Who has a medical suite in their—" Her eyes fell on the coffee table, a magazine, Forbes, and on the cover, staring back at her with those same unreadable eyes, was the man sitting 3 feet away. Nathan Cole, Seattle's tech titan, net worth $4.2 billion. Clara's blood turned to ice. She looked at him, then at the magazine, then back at him. "You," she breathed. "You're—" Nathan said nothing. His jaw tightened. "The fries, the cafe? You paid for everything because you're a billionaire?" Clara's voice rose. "And you've been, what? Following me? Watching me?" "Clara, I can explain." "No." She swung her legs off the sofa, ignoring the dizziness that swept through her. "No, I asked you to share your fries because I couldn't feed my son. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? And the whole time, you were this?" She gestured at the magazine like it was evidence of a crime. "I thought you were the strongest person I'd ever met." Nathan said quietly. Don't. Clara's voice cracked like thin ice. Don't you dare. I don't want your pity. I don't want your money. I don't want to be your project. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Nathan opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in his adult life, he had no answer. Clara grabbed Noah's hand. He had been watching silently from the corner and walked toward the door. Clara, wait, please. She turned. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was steady as steel. Stay away from me, Mr. Cole. Stay away from both of us. The door slammed behind her. Nathan stood alone in the room. Sarah's photograph felt like a stone in his pocket. He had finally found someone who made him feel alive again. And he had just lost her. 3 days passed. Nathan barely slept. He barely ate. He went through the motions of running his company, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, in a cramped apartment he had never seen, with a woman and a boy who wanted nothing to do with him. On the 4th morning, his assistant knocked on his office door. Mr. Cole, there's someone here to see you. I'm not taking meetings. Sir, it's your mother. Nathan looked up. Margaret Cole, Maggie to everyone who loved her, stood in the doorway. She was 68 years old, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and utterly unimpressed by her son's billions. She had raised him alone after his father walked out when Nathan was 3, working as a waitress, a house cleaner, a seamstress, whatever it took to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She was also the only person in the world Nathan had never been able to lie to. You look terrible, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Hello to you too, Mom. Don't sass me. I drove 3 hours because your assistant told me you've been staring at walls and skipping meals. Maggie studied him with eyes that saw everything. Who is she? Nathan blinked. What? The woman. The one who's got you twisted up like a pretzel. Don't deny it. I can see it written all over your face. Same look your father had when he met me. She paused. Before he became a disappointment anyway. Nathan exhaled slowly. Then because he could never hide anything from his mother, he told her everything. The cafe, the fries, the bus stop, the library, the collapse, the confrontation. When he finished, Maggie was quiet for a long moment. So let me understand this, she said finally. You found a woman who reminds you of me, who reminds you of who you used to be. And when she found out you were rich, she walked away? She thinks I pitied her. Did you? No. Nathan's voice was barely a whisper. I admired her. He stopped. I don't know what I felt. I just know I haven't felt anything in 4 years. Then she asked me for fries, and suddenly I could breathe again. Maggie nodded slowly. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph. Nathan recognized it immediately. It was him at age 7, standing outside their old apartment building in Tacoma, holding a plate of fries and grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed smile. You remember what I used to say? Maggie asked. Nathan's throat tightened. Always share your fries. Always share your fries. Not because you have plenty. Not because it's polite. Maggie leaned forward. Because kindness isn't about what you have. It's about what you give anyway, even when it costs you. She pressed the photograph into his hand. Show her who you really are, Nathan. Not the billionaire, not the magazine cover, the boy I raised, the one who shared his lunch with kids who had nothing, the one who cried when his goldfish died, the one who loved his wife so much he forgot how to live when she was gone. Nathan stared at the photograph. The little boy stared back. How? He asked quietly. How do I show her? Maggie smiled. You start by being honest. Really honest. The kind of honest that hurts. That night, Nathan sat at his desk and did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, handwritten on plain paper, with all the imperfections that came with trying to put a heart into words. He didn't offer money. He didn't offer a job. He didn't apologize because he wasn't sorry for caring about her. He was only sorry for not being honest. He wrote about his mother, about the apartment in Tacoma with the leaky roof and the radiator that never worked right, about the fries they used to share at the diner down the street when money was tight and love was all they had. He wrote about Sarah, about Emma, about the yellow blanket she was wrapped in the day she was born, about the way Sarah laughed at his terrible jokes, about the way Emma's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb like she would never let go, about the accident, about the funeral, about 4 years of building walls because feeling nothing was easier than feeling everything. And he wrote about Clara, about how she walked into that cafe like a queen, even though she was counting pennies, about how she asked for help without begging, offered payment when she had none, about how she reminded him that kindness still existed, that strength wasn't about how much you had, it was about how you carried what you didn't have. He ended the letter with an address, 247 Pine Street, apartment 3B, Tacoma. "This is where I grew up," he wrote. "The door will be unlocked. If you want to know who I really am, not the billionaire, not the magazine cover, but the boy underneath it all, come see for yourself. No pressure, no expectations, just the truth." He mailed it the next morning. Then he drove to Tacoma and waited. 3 days later, Clara stood outside a modest apartment building on a quiet street in Tacoma. She had almost thrown the letter away. She had read it 4 times, convincing herself with each reading that it was manipulation. Another rich man's trick. Another version of charity dressed up as understanding. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the handwriting, imperfect, almost nervous, nothing like what she'd expect from a billionaire. Maybe it was what he wrote about his mother, with a tenderness that reminded her of how she talked about Noah. Maybe it was the part about his wife and daughter, about loss and emptiness and the desperate search for something real. Or maybe it was Noah. Every single day since the hospital, her son had asked the same question. "Is the fry man okay, Mommy? He looks so sad." Clara climbed 3 flights of stairs. The door to apartment 3B was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Nathan stood by a window overlooking the street. The apartment was empty, just bare walls and worn wooden floors, and a few cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. Only one thing remained on the wall, a framed photograph of a woman with tired, kind eyes holding a young boy. "This is where I grew up," Nathan said without turning around. "My mother raised me here, alone, after my father left." Clara stepped inside. She said nothing. "We had nothing, but she made it feel like everything." Nathan's voice was quiet, raw. "She used to buy 1 plate of fries at the diner on the corner, and we'd share it. She always gave me the bigger half, even when I knew she was hungry, even when I could hear her stomach growling." He turned to face her. "She said kindness wasn't about having enough. It was about sharing anyway." "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked. "Because you think I pitied you." Nathan held her gaze. "And I need you to understand that I didn't. Not for 1 second." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out another photograph. A woman with auburn hair, laughing at the camera. A baby in a yellow blanket. Tiny and perfect. "My wife, Sarah," he said, "and our daughter, Emma. They died 4 years ago. Car accident. Rainy night. The other driver fell asleep at the wheel." Clara's breath caught. "I built walls after that," Nathan continued. "I worked 20-hour days because if I stopped, I'd have to feel it. I became the billionaire everyone reads about. Successful, powerful, completely empty." His voice cracked. "And then you walked into that cafe, and you asked to share my fries. And for the first time in 4 years, I felt like a human being again." Silence filled the room. Clara looked at the photograph of Sarah and Emma. then at the photograph of Nathan's mother, then at him, this man who had everything and nothing, who had lost as much as she had, who was standing in his childhood apartment trying to prove he was more than his money. "I'm still not taking your charity," she said finally. "I know. But if you meant what you wrote in that letter, about the children's app, about needing an illustrator, I meant every word." Clara nodded slowly. "Then I'll consider it." Nathan exhaled. "On one condition," she added. "Name it. You teach Noah how to make shadow puppets. He's been trying since he saw your mother's picture. And honestly," a small smile tugged at her lips, "he's terrible at it." Nathan laughed. It was a real laugh. Surprised, warm, human. Deal. The transition wasn't instant. Real things never are. Clara took 2 weeks to make her decision. She met with Nathan's development team, reviewed the project specifications, asked hard questions. She needed to know this was a real job, not disguised charity, not a handout wrapped in a contract. It was real, and it was hers if she wanted it. She said yes. Her first day at the office, Clara arrived early. A security guard walked her to her desk, a small workspace by a window overlooking a courtyard filled with autumn leaves. On the desk sat a sketch pad, a set of professional artists' pens, and a small card that read, "Welcome to the team. We're lucky to have you." Anne! Clara touched the nameplate in front of her. Clara Bennett, Creative Development. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then she picked up a pen and got to work. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Clara had experienced before. She designed characters. She illustrated storyboards. She brought warmth and wonder to screens and code. And slowly, she began to bloom. Nathan appeared occasionally, never hovering, never checking up. He would stop by her desk with a cup of tea and a quiet, "Heard you were working late," before disappearing down the hallway. Sometimes he brought feedback on her designs. Sometimes he just wanted to see what she was creating. One afternoon, Clara was sketching a forest scene. Towering trees, glowing fireflies, a mother owl tucking her baby into a nest. When she felt someone behind her, she turned. Nathan stood close, closer than usual. His eyes were on the drawing. "You always draw your own life," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Clara looked at the page, at the mother owl protecting her child. "Some of it," she admitted, "and some of it is what I wish my life had looked like." Their eyes met. Something passed between them, something unspoken, something that had been building for weeks. Nathan reached out and brushed an errant strand of hair from her face. Clara didn't pull away. "I'm glad you said yes," he said quietly. "Me too." They stood like that for a moment longer, close enough to touch, neither quite ready to break the spell. Then Clara smiled. "Now go away. I have owls to finish." Nathan grinned. "Yes, ma'am." He walked away, but Clara noticed he glanced back twice before he reached the door. One Sunday afternoon, there was a knock at Clara's apartment door. She opened it to find Maggie Cole standing in the hallway, holding a plate covered in foil. "Chocolate chip cookies," Maggie announced. "Homemade. You're going to invite me in, and we're going to have tea, and I'm going to meet this boy I've heard so much about." Clara blinked. "How did you—" "I have my ways." Maggie smiled warmly. "Also, my son is completely in love with you and can't stop talking about you and your son, so I figured it was time to see what all the fuss was about." Before Clara could respond, Noah appeared behind her. "Are those cookies?" "They certainly are." Maggie crouched down to his level. "And you must be Noah. I'm Maggie. I'm Nathan's mom." Noah's eyes went wide. "The fry man has a mom?" Maggie laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "Everyone has a mom, sweetheart, even billionaires." 20 minutes later, they were sitting around Clara's small kitchen table, drinking tea and eating cookies and talking like old friends. "So you're the one," Maggie said, studying Clara over the rim of her cup. "The one what?" "The one who reminded my son he has a heart." Maggie's eyes softened. "He's been frozen for 4 years, you know. After Sarah and Emma, he just shut down, built walls so high nobody could reach him." Clara looked down at her tea. "I raised that boy alone," Maggie continued. "Worked 3 jobs. Made magic out of nothing." She glanced around the small apartment, at the crayon drawings on the walls, the secondhand furniture, the evidence of a life built on love rather than money. "You remind me of myself 40 years ago. That's why he couldn't look away." Noah came running from his room, clutching a piece of paper. "Look, I drew our family." He held it up proudly. 3 stick figures sat around a table. One with wild yellow hair, one in a serious coat, one small one with a gap-toothed grin, and in the center, taking up most of the page, an enormous plate of fries. At the bottom, in crooked letters, "Family is people who share." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered. "That's exactly right." The Children's Tech Expo was packed. Families streamed through the convention center, exploring booths filled with color and innovation. Near the main stage, a banner hung from the ceiling. "Tiny worlds, stories that grow with you." On the giant digital screen, Noah stood in his best blue sweater, drawing with markers that brought his illustrations to life in real time. He started with a house, small, crooked, glowing with golden light. "That's my mom's house," he announced to the crowd. "She makes pancakes shaped like stars, and she draws pictures that make people feel happy." The audience laughed warmly. Next, he drew a figure with wild yellow hair. "That's my mom. She's the best artist I know." Then a man in a long coat, holding a plate. A speech bubble floated above his head. "They're better when shared anyway." "And that's Nathan," Noah explained. "He shared his fries with us when we didn't have any, and he taught me shadow puppets, and he doesn't look sad anymore." In the audience, Clara wiped her eyes. Nathan reached over and took her hand. Behind them, Maggie smiled. "That's my family," Noah said, pointing at the screen. "We're not perfect, but we share everything, and that's what makes us a family." The applause was thunderous. That evening, the three of them returned to the cafe where it all began. Same worn wooden tables, same creaky floor, same smell of roasted coffee and crispy fries. The same corner table where a billionaire once sat alone, hollow and lost, waiting for something he couldn't name. Nathan ordered fries before they even sat down. When the plate arrived, it was overflowing, golden, steaming, perfect. Noah reached for one, then stopped. "Wait," he said seriously. "We have to share. That's the rule." Clara laughed. She slid the plate to the center of the table. "They still taste better when shared," she said softly, looking at Nathan. "Don't they?" He met her eyes, held her gaze. After everything, the loss, the loneliness, the years of building walls, he had finally found his way back. "Yeah," he said, squeezing her hand. "They really do." He leaned over and kissed her gently. Noah made a face. "Gross." They all laughed. Outside the window, the Seattle skyline glittered against the darkening sky. Inside, 3 people shared a plate of fries and the quiet miracle of finding each other. Later that night, back at Clara's apartment, Noah taped a new drawing to the wall. 3 stick figures sat around a small table, a plate of fries in the center, so large it nearly filled the page. Above them, a glowing yellow sun. Below them, in careful 5-year-old letters, "Family is people who share." Clara stood in front of it for a long time. Nathan stood beside her, his arm around her waist. Maggie sat on the couch behind them, watching her son finally at peace. "You know," Maggie said softly, I always told him that kindness would come back to him someday, Clara smiled. He shared his fries with a stranger. And look what he got in return. Maggie's eyes glistened. A family. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, a small apartment filled with crayon drawings and secondhand furniture, and the quiet, holy presence of love rebuilt from broken pieces. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue story, just two imperfect people who found each other in the middle of their mess and chose to stay, and a plate of fries that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the quiet power of kindness, and made you believe again in second chances, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Every like, every share, every comment helps us bring more heartfelt stories to people who need them. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness are the ones that stay with you longest. See you in the next story.